Welcome to Eternal Light, where we share the deepest spiritual values. Wishing everyone good health, peace with your family, joy with your friends, and endless happiness under the eternal light of God. In today's video, we invite you to join us on a journey of discovery, one marked by God's presence, which we may sometimes fail to notice. And if, whether by chance or intention, you recognize these signs, it is clear that God is right beside you. Your task is simply to begin the transformative changes that are about to come. Eternal Light wants you to stay until the end of this video, as every word and every message in it carries powerful and precise warnings and reminders. If you can apply them all, then surely you have already won on the path you have chosen, and of course, with God guiding you. Now please support us by subscribing, share the message, and like or comment "I'm ready" so we can get started right away. Chapter 1. When Waiting Becomes a Miracle. Have you ever pondered why heartfelt prayers poured out with the very essence of our souls seem to vanish into the void? Why doors of opportunity, paths we believe divinely ordained, remain stubbornly closed? And why, despite righteous actions, obedient hearts, and hands sowing seeds of hope, the silence from heaven persists as if God has turned his face away? The answer doesn't lie in simplistic logic or hollow consolation. It emerges from a paradoxical truth that within these seasons of waiting, where life appears absent, a miracle quietly unfolds. Not the immediate kind that transforms circumstances, but a profound internal metamorphosis, a miracle birthed solely through delay. We often associate miracles with dazzling moments, water turned to wine, the dead raised, storms calmed by a word. Yet there's another miracle, equally potent, perhaps demanding even greater faith. The act of waiting in darkness, devoid of evidence, signs, or guarantees, and still believing. Believing that God is not only present, but actively working, even when unseen. Trusting that not yet isn't a cold denial, but a tender whisper. Wait, for I am preparing something better. Scripture doesn't shy away from the theme of waiting. In fact, it's woven with tales of souls tested by time. Abraham waited decades for the promised son, grappling with the painful tension between divine promise and barren reality. Joseph, after receiving visions from God, was sold into slavery, falsely accused and forgotten in prison for years, a span so long his dreams seemed dead. David, anointed as king in youth, fled for his life, living as a fugitive, awaiting the fulfillment of God's promise. In each narrative, waiting wasn't a meaningless pause. It was a crucible, molding the soul into the image of the promiser. We often expect God to intervene instantly if he loves us. But divine love differs from human affection. It doesn't spoil us with premature gifts, but refines us through perfect timing. God desires not only to grant us blessings, but to prepare us to receive and steward them without being crushed. Many falter not due to failure, but because success arrives too soon. Hence, God's timing is as crucial as his gifts. We might pray for rain, but if the soil isn't tilled, rain yields only mud. Similarly, if our hearts aren't prepared, blessings can become burdens. Something deeper transpires during waiting. God isn't merely altering external circumstances, he's transforming us. It's in waiting, when answers elude us and divine silence prevails, that faith is purified to its essence. Imagine a child learning to cross a swaying rope bridge. Fearful, the child wants to be carried. But the father knows that unless the child learns balance, dependence will persist. So, he lets the child proceed slowly and shakily, his loving gaze never wavering. His silence isn't abandonment, but a vote of confidence in the child's potential, a belief the child has yet to grasp. Similarly, when we feel forgotten in waiting, perhaps God watches us with hopeful eyes. Not because he's distant, but because he's inviting us into a higher miracle, the miracle of spiritual maturity. Certain lessons are learned only in darkness. We learn to believe without seeing, hope without signs, love without feelings. This is faith, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Such faith doesn't develop if every door opens instantly, if every prayer is promptly answered. Indeed, it's in waiting that we grasp the profound meaning of prayer. When requests aren't granted as desired, we're compelled to seek God himself, rather than what we want from him. Gradually, our hearts shift. We no longer just ask him to open doors. We ask Him to make us worthy to walk through them with humility and strength. Waiting also teaches trust. Trust isn't believing everything will go according to our plans, but believing that even without understanding the plan, we know the planner. Trust means asking questions without demanding answers, courageously living in the space between promise and fulfillment. And if Scripture teaches us anything through lives like Job, Ruth, Moses, and even Christ Himself, it's that those who wait faithfully are never disappointed. When Job sat in ashes, having lost everything, he didn't know heaven was watching, that his life was part of a grander story of triumph over evil. When Moses tended sheep in Midian for 40 years, he couldn't foresee that each step brought him closer to the burning bush, his call to deliver a nation. And when Jesus entered Gethsemane, awaiting betrayal, the cross, and the Father's will, he demonstrated that even God's Son wasn't exempt from the miracle of waiting. So, dear friend, if you're in a season of waiting, don't view it as failure. It might be the inception of a silent miracle, not as spectacular as fire from heaven, but as profound as God's breath upon your soul. And when the time comes, when the fullness of time arrives, you'll realize every moment of waiting was purposeful. Every tear, every seemingly unanswered prayer, every quiet step was noted, used to prepare something beyond imagination. Therefore, wait not as one in despair, but as one who knows God is never late. He's crafting a greater miracle from your very waiting. Chapter 2. Patience brings maturity. Have you ever paused in the midst of the blurry years of your life, looked up at the gloomy sky, and whispered to God, "Father, I'm ready now. Why haven't you opened the door?" That question, I believe, is the silent sob of countless souls quietly bleeding under the weight of waiting. The video "You'll see this when God knows you're ready" is not merely a word of comfort. It is a sacred love letter from heaven to those who are wandering through the land of not yet given. And if I may reflect under the light of the faith I treasure, I would say, waiting, when placed in the hands of God, is never a meaningless pause. It is an indispensable part of the dance of grace. Joseph, a boy with a dream from heaven, did not immediately become the man of honor. Instead, he was sold into slavery, thrown into prison, forgotten, and through all those trials, the strange thing is that he never lost his faithfulness to God. We often look at the ending of Joseph's story, his glory in Egypt, and forget that the beginning and middle of this righteous man's life were drenched in tears. Like a watch dismantled piece by piece, Joseph's life seemed to fall apart meaninglessly. But in truth, God is the master watchmaker. He never winds the gears wrong. I often wonder, if Joseph had never been thrown into the pit, would he have learned the lesson of patience? If he had never been imprisoned, would he have had the chance to display his wisdom before the king? And if those years had not unfolded, would his heart have been wide enough to forgive his brothers, the very ones who cruelly sold him? Here, waiting is no longer a painful delay, but God's quiet preparation. He shapes the soul through winding paths. Isaiah 60:22 emphasizes a divine truth. I, the Lord, will hasten it in its time. That is a promise that thunders like lightning in the midst of drought. The miracle is that God's timing is never late, nor is it ever rushed. He is not in a hurry because he is not bound by the hourglass of mankind. If you have ever waited for a miracle, you may understand. Haste is often the voice of fear, while waiting is the song of trust. I remember a young boy once ran up to me holding a toy knife and said, "Sir, I want to be a grown-up so I can use a real knife." I simply smiled and replied, "When you are ready, the real knife won't hurt you." And I suddenly realized we often act just like that child before God. We long for great things, for responsibilities, for powerful gifts. But God knows that if He grants those things too early, what we consider a blessing may become a curse. Like a king who lacks wisdom but holds the throne, he can only lead his nation to ruin. In Deuteronomy 8:2, God reminded His people that their years of wandering in the wilderness were not meant for punishment, but to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart. Trials are God's loving mirror to help man truly know himself. It's not that God needs to test us to learn something. He already knows everything. But He allows us to go through trials so that we may see our hearts, so that layers of false faith may be stripped away and raw truth be laid bare. Perhaps no image is more beautiful than that of the Israelites wandering 40 years in the desert, a journey that seemed aimless, but was in fact a sacred cleansing. In that waiting, the old generation passed, and a new, more faithful generation was formed. Not because God was slow, but because he would not hand over the promised land to those who still carried slavery in their souls. The promised land is not for those who are only free in body. It is for those who have been set free to the depths of their spirit. James, in his letter, wrote something that seems paradoxical. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. James 1:2-4. The reason is that trials not only reveal weakness, but refine faith into steadfastness. Like iron being heated and hammered on the anvil to become a sword, our souls become sharp in the hands of God only after they have passed through fire. And it is patience, not power or knowledge, that is the sign of true spiritual maturity. I have always believed that God does not only care about our destination, but also deeply about who we become on the journey. Where he leads is not just a place, but a state. A person may walk through a great door, but if their soul is still small, that door may crush them. Therefore, God delays not to punish, but to create. He slows down to wait for our souls to grow into the fullness of the calling he has set. In the book of Job, we meet a man who lost everything: family, wealth, health, and even the empathy of his friends. Job didn't understand why he suffered, but he still said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13:15. That is mature faith, a faith that rises above understanding, that transcends the question of why, and lives in the land of even so. Waiting, in this case, is the soul's battle, not with the world, but with itself, so that faith may be refined until no impurity remains. I used to think the greatest thing a person could achieve was to witness a miracle. But over time, I've realized the greater thing is to become someone who can wait for a miracle without losing faith. Not everyone gets to see the Red Sea part in an instant. Some must walk around Jericho for 7 days, one lap each day, in strange silence until the walls fall. They were not allowed to complain, not allowed to grumble, only to walk. That waiting was the greatest act of faith, because it was not based on what was seen, but on the one who promised. If you are in a season of waiting, do not see it as a time of being forgotten. Do not think that God has turned his face away. On the contrary, perhaps he is stitching together each piece of grace to prepare the finest robe for you, like the robe Joseph wore the day he was restored. Sometimes, God is silent not because he is absent, but because he is working deeply beneath the surface, where no one sees, but where roots grow. I once wrote, "God is too great to be fully understood, but he is never too distant to be loved." If you don't understand why you have to wait, love him in that unknowing, because it is in the darkness that the stars shine brightest. And in the waiting, your heart may learn to beat in rhythm with heaven. So instead of asking, "When, Lord?" ask, "Who must I become to be ready for what you've ordained?" Because spiritual maturity lies not in receiving what we want, but in loving God even when he says, "Not yet." Chapter 3. Waiting as a spiritual discipline. If you have ever sat in a dark room where time seems to freeze with each slow tick of the clock, you will understand the soul's sensation when forced to wait without knowing when what you hope for will come. Waiting, that seemingly simple word, is actually one of the harshest spiritual disciplines a person must endure. In the modern world, where speed is celebrated and every delay is seen as a system failure, waiting seems almost nonsensical, even a failure. But in the logic of the heavens, where wisdom transcends the trivial demands of humanity, waiting is the crucible where souls are tested, reborn, and shaped to become more like the Creator. I believe that waiting is not a punishment, but a strange privilege, a call from God to enter into a deeper relationship with him. Just as a teacher never assigns a great task to an immature student, God does not rush us to reach our destiny if our souls are still weak, full of pride, or lacking in understanding. He is not only concerned with what we do, but deeply concerned with who we are when we do it. Because in his eyes, the quality of the soul matters more than outward success. Take Joseph as an example. and we see a living testimony of this. A dreamer with a colorful coat, loved specially by his father, dreaming of ruling over his brothers and even his parents. A dream, not of youthful arrogance, but one divinely given by God. But right after the dream, the harsh reality tore apart his childhood. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, working without pay in Potiphar's house, then falsely accused and imprisoned in an Egyptian dungeon. Each chapter in his life seemed like a step farther from God's promise, but in reality, it was a series of steps leading to the throne of destiny God had planned for Joseph. In the darkness of the prison, Joseph's soul was shaped from pride, from a swollen ego due to privilege. He learned patience, learned to interpret dreams not to glorify himself but to serve others. It was no longer a dream for himself, but a revelation for the redemptive work of God's people. Do you see it? Waiting is the space for the soul to mature, and that space, though dark, is filled with the invisible light of grace. Joseph did not speak out in protest when abandoned, did not curse when forgotten by the one he helped in prison. Even when interpreting dreams for the chief cupbearer and asking him to remember him, Joseph did not say, "Save me," but simply, "Please remember me." That is hope without demand, faith without force. A soul that has learned that God's timing is always right, even if it seems late according to human clocks. The Bible is not short of stories where waiting is used as a divine tool for teaching. Abraham waited for a son for decades, and only when he was almost physically incapable of fathering a child did the promise come to pass. Why? Because if Isaac had come earlier, it could have been the work of the flesh, but when he was born in old age, it could only be a miracle. And thus, faith is exalted. Faith, as Hebrews defines it, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You don't need faith for something you're already holding in your hands. You only need faith when you're waiting. I recall a passage in Deuteronomy 8 verse 2, where God says he made the Israelites wander for 40 years in the wilderness to test, humble, and know their hearts. Oh, God knows everything. So why does he need to test? No, he does not need to test to know. He tests so that we may know ourselves, know our weaknesses, know where our hearts are still rebellious, know what causes us to worship idols, know the fears that control us, and most importantly, know that we need him more than we need answers. We often think of waiting as the gap between where we are and where we want to be. But truly it is the gap between who we are now and the person God is shaping us to be according to his destiny for us. And here's where the picture becomes challenging. Waiting is not just passive, it is action, but of a deeper, soulful kind. In James 1:2-4, the apostle says, "Count it all joy when you fall into various trials." It sounds paradoxical, but only those who have experienced the sweetness that arises from obedience and suffering truly understand what that joy is. It is a joy not from the event itself, but from the knowing that we are being shaped for something greater. Like a soldier who does not complain during harsh training, knowing that the victory in battle depends on every drop of sweat shed before the fight, the soul knows, it understands that those years of waiting in solitude are heaven's training grounds. If I could say anything to those in a season of waiting, feeling forgotten, forsaken, ignored by God, I would say, he is at work. Not visibly, but in a way deeper than anything you can imagine. Just as roots grow beneath the earth, where no one sees, no one praises, but provide the foundation for life above, God's work in you now is quiet but essential. And when the time comes, as Isaiah 60:22 says, "When the time is right, I will make it happen quickly." You will see that every tear was not in vain, every long night has meaning, and every repeated prayer has not been ignored. Faith, when shaped in waiting, becomes a steadfast faith. It is no longer the kind of faith that seeks miracles, but the kind that persists even without miracles. It is the kind of faith that enabled Daniel's 3 friends to say to the king, "Even if he does not save us, we will not bow down to your image." It is the faith that does not seek escape, but seeks faithfulness. And it is the kind of faith that the world lacks, because the world seeks results, but God seeks souls. In conclusion, if I can call this a conclusion, it is this: waiting is not a wasted time, but an invested time. Waiting is not a delay, but a preparation. And waiting is not a refusal, but a promise being written in the silent language of heaven. When you learn to see waiting through the eyes of faith, you will no longer be disturbed by God's silence. Because when He is silent, He is often teaching you how to hear His voice more profoundly. Are you waiting? Let your soul quiet down. Hear this as a whisper from eternity. I am doing a new thing. Be patient. For when you are ready, I will open your eyes, and you will see what I have been preparing all this time. Perhaps nothing makes the modern person feel more uncomfortable and unsettled than the need to wait. In an age where everything can be delivered to your door within an hour, where information fits in your pocket, and where sorrow can be suppressed with a gentle swipe on a screen, waiting seems like a relic of the past, a cold wind from another century. But in the divine reality, where time is not bound by clocks and where growth is measured not by speed but by depth, waiting is a gift. It is the forge for the soul, the deep class that God has prepared for those He loves the most. I once thought waiting was like a dark hallway where one stands motionless and meaningless while the door ahead refuses to open. But I was wrong. No period in the life of a believer is meaningless if we look through the eyes of faith. When the Israelites wandered through the desert for 40 years, instead of the 11 days that a crude map might show, we should not view it as a geographical misdirection, but as a rediscovery of the human essence. The desert is not merely land, sand, or dryness. The desert is the test of faithfulness, the place where demands and desires are stripped away from religious appearances. It is where God digs deep into the human heart with the spade of time and adversity. I remember reading Deuteronomy 8:2, where Moses reminds the people that it was God who led them through that path, to humble you, to test you, and to know what was in your heart. There is something both frightening and comforting in this. Frightening because God cares more about the inner life, what we often avoid confronting, than the outward appearance, and comforting because He cares about it. He does not want us to enter the promised land with a broken and corrupt soul. God was not in a rush to bring His people to a land flowing with milk and honey. He wanted them to understand that the destination could not be separated from the journey. Just as a father does not throw his child onto the throne without training, God does not place His people in glory if their minds are still enslaved. Escaping Egypt is one thing, but getting Egypt out of their hearts is another. It seems that people always think freedom is about moving quickly, about reaching the destination soon. But in reality, freedom is about being liberated from ourselves, something that only a journey, long in silence, scarcity, and even confusion can create. If you have ever felt as though God is delaying His promise, as if He is silent in the desert of your soul, remember this. During those 40 years, manna still fell every morning. The cloud pillar still went before them by day, and the fire pillar still gave light by night. Even in the waiting, God's presence remained in motion. Even in God's delay, we can find a miracle, that God is not in a hurry, because He is weaving something eternal within us. And if waiting is the forge, then patience is the fire that keeps everything from breaking apart. I am not talking about the indifferent patience of someone sitting in a doctor's waiting room, or the reluctant endurance of someone stuck in traffic. I am talking about the holy patience that James describes in his letter 1:2-4, the patience that arises from joy when facing trials, because we know it produces something deeper, maturity and completeness. The strange thing is, those very trials, adversities, and delays are the means by which God perfects us. Just like an oak tree cannot grow strong without enduring harsh winters, the Spirit cannot grow in ease. Faith is not a commodity available in the divine store, but a muscle that must be trained through every step taken in the barren land. Jesus never hid this from His disciples. He didn't say that living according to Him would be easy. He spoke of the cross, of denial, of perseverance until the end. He knew that steadfast souls do not come from joyful gatherings, but from solitary prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was there, where no one stayed awake with Him, where sweat turned to blood, that the patience of our Lord reached its pinnacle. And if He, the Son of God, had to wait, had to suffer and be patient, how could we think we would be exempt? As I reflect on this, I realized that patience is something utterly supernatural. It does not come from human willpower, but from absolute trust in the one who has appointed the time for everything. It is a choice every day to believe that God is doing something, even when I don't see it, don't feel it, and don't understand it. It is a silent act of worship, a submission without the need for praise. I remember a time in my life when I prayed with all my heart for something. I believed, I hoped, and I expected. But God remained silent for many months. Those months became years. And then when I began to think that God had forgotten, He opened a door, but in a way I had never imagined. It was not the response that changed me, it was the waiting. For I was no longer the person who had first prayed. I had learned that God is never late, but He is never early either, because He arrives at the exact moment to meet a person who has been prepared. You might be a Joseph with a great dream, but presently stuck in a pit. You might be an Israelite in the desert, with shoes that never wear out, but a heart that is dry. Or you might be like me, a soul fumbling between doors that have yet to open. Whoever you are, remember, no waiting journey is wasted in the kingdom of God. Every slow step, every weary moment, every unanswered prayer is the holy material God is using to build His kingdom within you. In the end, when you look back, you will not thank God just for the destination. You will thank Him for not hurrying, because it is in the delay that you have met Him. Chapter 5, a real-life story. There is something strangely paradoxical, almost mythical in the way God works with time. He is eternal, yet teaches us through every moment. He holds the infinite, yet cares for every second we live in longing and anticipation. And it is precisely in that waiting that the human soul is refined, shaped, and molded into the image God has intended from eternity past. This is not just a doctrine, it is a spiritual reality reflected in every weary step of Israel's journey through the wilderness and in every seemingly mundane life story of people today. When the Israelites left Egypt, they were not just led out of the chains of slavery, but entered into a metaphysical school, a place where their souls would learn to trust, to endure, to live by faith, and not just by bread. They took 40 years to arrive at a destination that should have only taken 11 days. It's easy to think of that as a strategic failure, but the Bible, specifically in Deuteronomy 8:2, shows that this was a divinely orchestrated plan of God. Remember the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart. I believe the real challenge never lies outside, not in the desert, not in the harsh weather, nor in the lack of water, but in what God is drawing out from the depths of the human heart: motives, faith, perseverance. God didn't need a people to rush into the promised land. He wanted a people who belonged to Him spiritually, not just geographically. And to turn those who had only known complaints into a holy nation, He used time as an invisible mold in which every weariness, every deprivation, and every stumble would become the material to shape a strong soul. But this is not only true for Israel. Today, in our modern society where everything is scheduled to the second, modern man needs to understand that waiting is not a wasted period, but a place where the soul is forged. I once met a man named Thomas, whose life seemed like an endless test. He had studied theology, dreamed of teaching God's word, but was rejected over and over. Doors that opened for others remained closed for him. Finally, he worked for a nonprofit organization, doing logistics work that few noticed. But it was in that hidden place that he learned faithfulness, not complaining, and continued to pray for people he would never meet directly. One day, the founder of the organization passed away, and the leadership realized that Thomas, the one who had quietly served for years, was the right person to take the lead. They saw in him not just knowledge, but maturity, humility, and a spirit of prayer, things that can't be learned in a classroom, but can only be formed through waiting. I think of the character of Joseph in the Bible. He was once the most beloved son, then became a forgotten slave in prison. But God did not forget him. Through every year of being squeezed, betrayed, and forgotten, Joseph learned to listen to God's voice instead of his own heart. And when he was brought out of prison, he was no longer the boastful young man of the past, but a man who knew how to forgive, to govern, and to discern the dreams of men from the plans of God. Similarly, I once read about a woman named Rachel. She graduated in fashion design with a dream of starting her own brand. But after a few failures and a financial shock, Rachel had to take an assistant job in a company that had little to do with her field. She was angry with God, feeling abandoned. But gradually, she learned to make the most of every opportunity to learn, no longer feeling inferior when making coffee or setting up the meeting room. 6 years later, when the CEO resigned, he recommended Rachel as his successor because he saw in her vision, faithfulness, and practical management skills. The fashion brand she had once dreamed of now became a reality, not because of rushed steps, but through every patient step, with God as the unseen guide. What I realize is that spiritual maturity in Christianity doesn't come from avoiding hardship, but from letting hardship bring forth patience, and patience leading to perfection. As James the Apostle wrote, "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." James 1:2-4. That verse is a spiritual paradox. Joy does not come from ease, but from overcoming hardship with a soul that has been refined. I remember once speaking to a young man who asked me, "Why does God let everything take so long? Why doesn't He open a way as soon as I pray?" I didn't have a simple answer, but I told him that some flowers only bloom at night, some stars only appear when the sky is dark, and some character is only formed in moments no one witnesses. If God always answered immediately, we might turn out spoiled like a child indulged. But when He makes us wait, He is giving us an eternal gift, the ability to trust in Him, even when everything around us is silent. In reality, Christianity has never been a shortcut to success, but a long journey, one where the soul learns to love what is unseen, to hope for what is not yet visible, and to remain faithful even when no one praises. The miracle is, in every moment that seems like a delay, God is working in the dark, preparing something better for us. Not just external blessings, but internal growth. I wonder if the Israelites had reached the promised land in just 11 days, would they have been able to withstand the pressure of the enemy nation, of war, and of leadership? If Joseph had not been sold into slavery, would he have had enough mercy to forgive his brothers? If Rachel had started her company from day one, would she have had the backbone to lead? I don't think so, because great blessings always come with great character, and character is never born in haste. So, when we ask for something that God hasn't answered yet, don't be quick to despair. Maybe He isn't delayed, maybe we aren't ready. Maybe He is building a deeper foundation within us, so that when the blessing comes, it won't weigh down a fragile soul. And it is in that waiting, in every prayer unanswered, in every tear without explanation, that our soul is drawn closer to holiness. Because in the end, God doesn't just want to give us what we desire. He wants to make us like Him, and that is the greatest gift that waiting can offer. The final chapter, a lesson for everyone. In the memory of humanity, time is always a relentless obsession. We live between two boundaries, what has passed and what is yet to come. And between these two dimensions lies a reality that never stands still, the present, which slips away from our grasp like sand through our fingers. It is within this present, where prayers sometimes seem forgotten, dreams postponed, and hopes tested, that humanity begins to learn a sacred lesson understood only by humble souls. Waiting is not denial. In the mysterious light of Christianity, waiting is not a meaningless moment of delay, but a sacred school where God, with His love, shapes our souls in quietude and prepares us for something greater that we cannot yet comprehend. If there is one thing that the sacred history of the Bible repeatedly affirms, it is this truth: God always acts at the right moment, neither early nor late. Abraham, the father of faith, had to wait almost a lifetime to see the promise of a child fulfilled. Imagine the confusion in his heart. Old age, a frail body, a barren wife, yet he still believed, and in his patience, he became the father of many nations. Had God given him a child earlier, perhaps Abraham would not have learned the steadfastness in God's promise. Perhaps he would not have been refined through the long years of faith without evidence. Likewise, Joseph, sold as a slave, wrongfully imprisoned, did not see the meaning of those dark years until he was elevated to the position of Egypt's vizier. None of us wants to wait in the darkness, but it is precisely there that God writes the prologue to miracles. This makes me ponder deeply about how modern humans understand time. In an era of pressing a button and getting instant responses, where we expect deliveries within hours and answers within minutes, waiting for something over months, even indefinitely, seems like failure. But that is only true if you view life as a series of transactions, not as a journey of spiritual transformation. In the eyes of God, waiting is not a pause, it is an essential part of the eternal plan. And because we are creatures bound by time, we sometimes imagine that God's silence is his absence. But no, that silence is the sacred whisper of a God working in the dark, shaping our inner being as a potter patiently smooths out the imperfections in a clay jar. I also remember the words of the prophet Isaiah, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." It does not say that the blessed are those who get what they want, but those who wait with faith, and in that waiting, they are renewed. Patience is something none of us enjoys, but it is one of the first fruits of the Spirit mentioned in Galatians. This is no accident, for patience is the clearest evidence that a soul has learned to submit to the sovereignty of God. I once had the opportunity to correspond with a young man full of doubt. He wrote to me that he had prayed for months for an open door in his career, but all he received was silence. He said, "I think God has turned his back on me." I asked him what he had learned during that time. After a moment of silence, he replied that he had learned to let go of pride, to be grateful for the small things, and to trust those around him. I smiled at that letter and thought, God did not turn away. He was teaching him to walk by faith. We often think that God acts like an ideal time manager. He will answer on time, according to schedule. But he is never an employee of human expectations. He does not operate according to the world's office hours, but according to the perfect time, kairos, as the Bible calls it, the moment when our soul is ready to receive what he desires to give. A soul that has not been refined yet receiving great blessings may see those blessings turn into a disaster. But if we are refined through patience, when blessings come, we will know how to cherish them and use them for God's glory. I think of two modern people, living testimonies to this lesson. One is Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks. In the beginning, he was not successful. He faced repeated rejections and went through years when his business idea was seen as far-fetched. But instead of giving up, he kept serving, selling each cup of coffee, caring for each customer, tough waiting for the right moment. And then, when society began to shift, his vision was ready. What is admirable is not that he got what he wanted, but that during his waiting, he did not lose sight of his vision and faith. The second person is Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. As a young woman, she felt God's call, but the society of her time did not accept women working in medicine. She waited for many years, serving quietly, studying in silence. Then the Crimean War broke out. She stepped into the spotlight, not as someone waiting for a moment, but as one prepared in solitude and humble service. The years of her waiting were not wasted, but were the time God used to forge a strong, compassionate, and highly organized soul, qualities necessary for a great humanitarian reform. Waiting, if understood correctly, is submission. It is a declaration that God knows what is best for us, and he will provide it at the right time. None of us likes to live in the in-between, the space between dreams and reality, between prayer and fulfillment. But it is precisely in that in-between that we grow. It is in the waiting that we learn what success cannot teach us: perseverance, humility, and unconditional faith. I believe that waiting is a test. It asks the question, do you love God for who he is or for what he can do for you? If we remain faithful while not seeing results, if we continue to worship him while the door remains closed, then that is proof of genuine faith. Waiting teaches us that the greatest gift is not what we ultimately receive, but the person we become in the process. When you are waiting, do not think you are forgotten. Think that you are being trained by the Creator himself. Live each day as if you are in the waiting room before the throne, where no moment is wasted. Serve, pray, learn, love, for it is in these actions that your waiting becomes sacred. God never misses a faithful tear or a whisper of faith. And when the time comes, he will not rush, but like a great king entering the room he has prepared with rewards for his faithful servants. And when that moment comes, you will understand that all those years of waiting were not in vain. They are the opening chapters of a more beautiful story, a story that only God can write with timeless wisdom and unchanging love.